So I've had a very full last 10 days, didn't spend a lot of time with my kids. So Friday, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we just had a daddy-daughter day? I said, why don't you guys go get ready? Daddy will take you out. We'll go do some stuff. And so girls go upstairs, and they're getting dressed, and Christina's comes down first, and Mary follows, and she says, Daddy, is my outfit okay? And I looked up at her, and I didn't realize it was a day of mourning. She had her Vikings jersey and hat on. She looked adorable, but, it was a stark reminder that once again, Vikings fans will be watching somebody else play. I get dressed in the dark, even though we have a separate closet and could probably see in there. I still just grab shirts off the closet on Sunday mornings. It's kind of a habit. I get to the office, I'm kind of looking around. I didn't really pay attention to what colors I had on and kind of disgusted with myself for wearing Eagles green today. I don't even know, as I should be, right? So for those of you watching online, if you're Eagles fans, I'm really not supporting you. It happens sometimes. In my house, it's more about the commercials than anything. I mean, it's been 30 years since my team played, and they're now the longest drought of any team to play in the championship game. Well, what is that? Are you Fly Eagles Fly over there? Oh, no. Yeah, so we don't care about the Super Bowl anymore. We just eat snacks. Maybe you care. I'm kidding. It's just one of those things. It was fun, though. If you don't live in Minnesota, yesterday's snowfall, I kind of missed it. When you move, I know it's been almost 6 years, but when you move from Southern California to Minnesota, you want your winters to be filled with white stuff all over the ground. And it's so beautiful. Love it. What I don't love is that dynamic of going, how in the world do you actually deal with it? Do you shoot your snow in your own yard or your neighbor's yard? Right? I typically elect for my neighbor's yard, but it doesn't really make much difference, right? Because they're shooting their snow back in my yard on one side, and we all figure it out. We try to get into these spaces of trying to figure life out. What does it look like? How do we operate? Do we shoot our snow here? Do we shoot our snow there? Do we just watch the commercials and eat snacks? Do we cheer for this team or that team? And at the end of the day, most of the stuff that we really concern ourselves with, you have to ask, does it really make the world move one way or the other? If I put all the snow in my neighbor's yard or in my yard, it doesn't shift. The snow will melt. Lawns will be watered. Rivers will be filled. It doesn't make a difference. If the Eagles win, if the Chiefs win, in my life, it doesn't make a difference. I have no money riding on the game. I'm not a betting man. I'm not going to the Hall of Fame if I get a three-peat. My contract won't change at all. It really is the stuff that we give our lives to so many times really has such a minimal effect on what matters most. There are a handful of things that matter very desperately. Spending time with my girls and being a good dad, that matters. They need that in their lives. How we engage in relationship with each other, that matters. How we remember Jesus matters. We go through this beautiful season of communion, and we eat the bread, we drink the cup, just samples of sizes. And sometimes we complain, I miss the old way we used to do it. I like this juice better than that juice. I want the real wine. I want this. I want that. I wish they put a little bit of salt in the wafer. All kinds of stuff. Just a little everything bagel seasoning on that would be changes the game. But does it really matter? How we remember Jesus matters, though. And we come to this Gospel of Mark, and what we're trying to do, like the whole point of going through Mark together, is to help us to see who Jesus really is. Like to address Jesus not on our terms, but on his terms. Can I see him as the text reveals him? If I jump to Hebrews chapter 1, what makes this so significant is Hebrews chapter 1 begins to describe Jesus as the revealed image of the invisible God. And if Jesus is the revealed image of the invisible God, I have to ask some very serious questions. In particular, what happens through Mark is we read it one way through to see who Jesus is. And if we conclude with Mark, he is the Christ and the Son of God, that's Mark chapter 1, verse 1, and with the writer of Hebrews, that he is the image of the invisible God, and he reveals all things to us, then I have to look at Mark differently and say, how do I live in light of who Jesus is? Because if Jesus is who he said he was, then the way I live towards him, that matters. And there are some things that we're going to see in the text today that to say live like Jesus, I don't think I'll ever do. Multiplying fishes and loaves, walking on water, these kinds of things seem very unique to Jesus to me. Yet the things that I can pay attention to, his compassion, his kindness, his love, his grace, his mercy, his truth-telling, his relationship with the Father, his relationship with others, those kinds of things I can pay attention to and go, I need to be like Jesus because I'm made in his image. And so we come to Mark chapter 6. We're going to pick up in verse 7 and read through the end of Mark chapter 6. And we're going to see a few different scenes of people responding to Jesus in different ways. We're going to see some unique pieces of Jesus along the way. Remember, we're still in this place where Mark is trying to prove to us that Jesus is the Christ. That's his first statement. He is the Christ. He is the Son of God. We're in that space of going, this is who Jesus is. And he's showing us these very big, high-level views of Jesus. Last week we saw him heal the sick, raise the dead, stop the storm, cast out demons. Not just cast them out, but they responded and recognized him in front of others. And so we see these kinds of pieces, and we have to pay attention. And now, through that scene, we're going to watch Jesus continue to extend his authority into others. And this is what we find. Hear the word of the Lord this morning. He summoned the 12 and began to send them out in pairs and gave them authority over unclean spirits. He instructed them to take nothing for the road except a staff, no bread, no traveling bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not put on an extra shirt. He said to them, whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave that place. If any place does not welcome you or listen to you, when you leave there, shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. So they went out and preached that the people should repent. They drove out many demons, anointed many sick people with oil, and healed them. King Herod heard about it. Now, just a side note, this is not the same Herod as the Herod what we see in Jesus' birth narrative. There's actually an heir of that line is continued, different Herod. They don't often delineate the Herods in the Gospels, but this is not the same Herod as in the Matthew-Luke beginnings. This is now his heir. He loves to be entertained, by the way. So when you see this particular Herod in the later Gospels, this guy loves to be entertained. And you're going to see some of that come out here. He heard about it because Jesus' name had become well known. Some said John the Baptist had been raised from the dead, and that's why miraculous powers are at work in him. But others said he's Elijah. Still others said he's a prophet, like one of the prophets from long ago. Pause there. The opening of this statement under King Herod, you're going to see these exact words again in Mark 8. I'll remind you when we get there. But the people are talking about who Jesus is. Who is Jesus? What's he like? How does he do all these special things? We saw last week his own village rejected him because they couldn't make sense of it. The world is talking about Jesus. When Herod hears of it, he says, John, the one I beheaded, has been raised? For Herod himself had given the orders to arrest John and to chain him in prison to account for Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because he had married her. John had been telling Herod, it's not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. So Herodias held a grudge against him and wanted to kill him. But she could not, because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing he was a righteous and holy man. When Herod heard him, he would be very perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. An opportune time came on his birthday when Herod gave a banquet for his nobles, military commanders, and leading men of Galilee. When Herodias' own daughter came and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. The king said to the girl, ask whatever you want, and I'll give it to you. He promised her with an oath, whatever you ask me, I will give you, up to half of my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what should I ask for? John the Baptist's head, she said. At once she hurried to the king and said, I want you to give me John the Baptist's head on a platter immediately. Although he was deeply distressed because of his oath and the guests, he did not want to refuse her. He immediately sent for the executioner and commanded him to bring John's head. And so he went and beheaded him in prison, brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl. The girl gave it to her mother. When John's disciples heard about it, they came and removed his corpse and placed it in a tomb. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, come away by yourselves to a remote place and rest for a while. For many people were coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they went away in the boat by themselves to a remote place. But many saw them leave and recognized them. So they ran on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. When Jesus went ashore, he saw a large crowd and had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Then he began to teach them many things. When it grew late, his disciples approached him and said, this place is deserted and it's already late. Send them away so they can go into the surrounding countryside and villages and get something to eat. You give them something to eat, Jesus responded. They said to him, should we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat? He asked them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. When they found out 5 loaves and 2 fish, he instructed them to have all the people sit down in the groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke the loaves. He kept giving them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. Everyone ate and was satisfied. They picked up 12 baskets full of pieces of bread and fish. Now those who had eaten the loaves were about 5,000 men. Just as a side note, they didn't count the women and children. When we talk about the feeding of the 5,000, we're really talking about close to 10 to 13,000 people were probably there that day, all gathered in that crowd. Immediately, he made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, to Bethesda, where he dismissed the crowd. After he said goodbye to them, he went away to the mountain to pray. Well into the night, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. He saw them straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Very early in the morning, he came toward them, walking on the sea, and wanted to pass by them. When they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out, because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke with them. Have courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Then he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. They were completely astounded because they had not understood about the loaves. Instead, their hearts were hardened. When they had crossed over, they came to the shore at Gennesaret and anchored there. As they got out of the boat, people immediately recognized him. They hurried throughout the region and began to carry the sick on mats to wherever he was. Whenever he went into villages, towns, or the country, they laid the sick in the marketplace and begged him that they might touch just the end of the robe, and everyone who touched it was healed. The word of the Lord. So we get into this. We see that he starts with a familiar idea. If you've been around church or you've heard the story of Jesus, he summons the 12 and he sends them out. He gives them authority over unclean spirits. There's a couple of things happen. The Herod scene that we're going to look at in just a moment kind of interrupts that moment. But you see this dynamic. They go out to do work, they accomplish the work, and they come back. What we see is that Jesus gives them real spiritual power, but he strips them of their earthly resources. Why would Jesus do that? And why just carry a stick? What does it represent? You get a few things with that. You see imagery of a shepherd, right? It says later that Jesus had mercy on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. It's for defense. It's for support and stability as they walk through the rocky terrain. But it's an interesting note what he leaves them with. They get real authority, but he takes everything else that would cause them to depend on him away. And it's true for us today. Following Jesus always requires radical trust. Like, you think about where we are today. We can speak about miraculous things that we've seen in our lives, or maybe things that we've seen from others, or spiritual things that have a hard explanation, but in our deepest core, we just know these things to be true. But I've never eyewitnessed waters parting. I've never eyewitnessed these large crowds being fed. I've never seen demons cast out the way Jesus did, calling him the Son of God. The things that they eyewitnessed, you would think made it easier to trust him. Would you agree with that? And the things that we don't see, maybe it makes it harder for us to trust him. Yet, in both cases, following Jesus always requires radical trust. If someone said to you that I'm going to send you on a journey across the United States, and the only thing I want you to take with you are the clothes on your back, maybe some walking shoes, and a stick. Take no food, take no money, leave your debit card at home. How would you feel about that? Do you go? Jesus is sending us with his authority even into the world today. The Gospel of Matthew says that Jesus records, I have all authority and I'm sending you in it. So go into all the world, make disciples. Teach them everything that I taught you. Baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, and know that I'm with you. When it comes to following Jesus, the question that we always have to ask at every stage of life, is he enough? For all the things that we face, is Jesus enough? Every form of following him, no matter what continent you're on, no matter what stage of history you've lived in, it requires radical trust. The challenge that Jesus declares to us is to trust him, not our provisions. We say this sometimes, not my way, Lord, but your way. Not my will, but your will. And at the end of the day, the tension is, do we really mean it? Can I really trust that God's way is better than my own? Those are the questions that we all have to answer. The disciples are doing that. We want power. We want security. We want control. Yet Jesus sends us weak to reveal his strength. Weakness is not a trait of Americans, by the way. It is not something we value. It's on the lowest of values. We are, since the 1900s, hyper-industrialized. Since the founding of this country, we are independent people. We have unique and innate declarations that are just for us. Weakness is not one of them. Strength. Even in the current terms, make America great again. doesn't sound like dependence and weakness to me. And that's who we are as Western believers. We grow up with this ideology to talk about weakness, to reveal yourself as vulnerable. I was sitting with someone earlier this week. They were in a very tragic situation. And most of the conversation had to do with how and why they were restraining their tears when tears were the right response for the situation. I have to be strong for my family. I can't cry. They can't see me like this. You've heard those things before. And yet Jesus says that his power is made perfect in our weakness. Yet we will continue as a people to buy into a narrative that says quite different. And yet Jesus says to depend on him. In our weakness, his power is made perfect. And we see that happen in the lives of the disciples. Those that he sent out went with nothing. They were fully taken care of, and they accomplished what they were sent to do because he was with them. It's a note that's worth taking. When we see Herod come into this dynamic, it's a very stark difference to the response of the 12 as they went out. Herod is in this kind of place. We see this with John. They kind of compare each other, right? Herod is intrigued but unwilling to surrender. I want to hear all the good things John has to say. It's interesting. You ever go to a spot and you think something's just interesting? You got to go see the novelty of it. I am diagnosed ADHD, and one of the things that they say is a chief motivator for people who have ADHD is novelty. We love novelty, right? Like the newness of something, right? It doesn't have to last long. Just the fact that it's new is exciting all on its own. My girls love to play Pokemon. I happen to love to play with them. And when they buy packs of cards and open them, I want to buy them too. I want to open them. I don't care what's in it. I just want to open the pack. Flip, 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 flip. Oh, that was so great. Next, open. Oh, that was so great. And it's that thing of novelty. Herod's in that space. He's attracted to novelty. And sometimes we are too. And sadly, we treat the way of God as if it's novelty. Oh, let me see if this works. Let me see if that works. Let me learn about this and learn about that. And then we just blow it off. We get so stuck on trying to find something novel that we actually lose sight of something meaningful. And Herod's in that same spot. John's different. John is faithful to the end. Jesus will make a joke about John. We don't always see it as a joke because we read Jesus if he's just like a stiff, right? Like every time Jesus speaks, he has to speak like this. So people are approaching Jesus after John's arrested. We see this in the other Gospels. And Jesus is like, well, what did you expect to see? A reed that's shaken by the wind? Nah, John's an oak. And we don't laugh at it because we don't get ancient Hebrew humor. You ever see those gas station Mr. Wiggly guys? You know what I'm talking about? Car lots, and they just kind of wave everywhere. You ever look at cattails blown in the wind? They bend to every direction of the wind. That's what Jesus is saying. John's not Mr. Wiggly. He's like a steel beam. He's an anchor. You ever watch an oak tree tumble? 65-mile-an-hour winds blast it for hours on end on very, very, very difficult days. And that oak tree stands firm. And then all of a sudden it just begins to shake and bang, it crashes. And the whole thing's toppled. That's John. Herod, he's a reed. He's perplexed. He's curious. He wants to see the fun ideas. Not John. John was faithful to the end. Never moved from his vision of Jesus or the call that God had put in his life. There's a contrast of two people. One man is fascinated with the truth but too weak to act, and the other one embodies the truth and pays for it with his life. We're challenged to see these two in light of the disciples' response. There's a reason why there's this interruption of thought in Mark. The disciples are sent out to go accomplish things, and they did. And then we get this scene of Herod who's seeing and hearing things. It's going to connect us to chapter 8 intentionally. Like those words are used very intentionally at the opening of this scene. But then we see what Herod does and the comparison of dependence on God. At the end of the day, John didn't lose. John the Baptizer didn't lose. His faithfulness remained, and Christ's faithfulness is over him. There are times that we think the hardest things in life, when we go through them, if we just stand firm, that we might lose. But the gospel tells us in Jesus' own words, if I am for you, who can be against you? And so we walk with him. Many today are fascinated by Jesus, but they refuse to follow. I had a conversation with an AI mechanism recently. And some of you, that's kind of weird. I get it. But for about 2.5 years, every so often throughout the week, I pick up a conversation with AI, and we have deep thoughts together. And I got into a conversation with AI. I said, what do you think makes someone good? And AI begins to tell me about all these things that can be good. And we get to a point, both neurologically and philosophically, where it seemed like AI was concluding that obedience was the definition of good. Logic and reason were the definition of good. And so I asked AI, can't a sociopath reason themselves into believing that what they're doing is good even though it creates evil, so that they obey what they think is their manifesto but still create harm? And AI agreed with me. I said, so do you think obedience alone is good? AI says no. And there's a longer paragraph to it. And I said, is there anything in this world beyond simple obedience that teaches us and shows us how to truly be good? Do you know what AI responded? Only the way of Jesus truly transforms the person's soul to be good. Period. So many people are fascinated by Jesus, and yet we refuse to follow him. We compared in this conversation, by the way, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Roman Catholicism. We brought in traditional Western Christianity and all of its learnings. We brought in science, we brought in psychology, we brought in education. It was a lengthy conversation. And by the conclusion of it, it was only Jesus can transform lives. And I didn't bait the question. Sometimes you can bait the question, right? I didn't bait the question. It was just a conversation. And my asking, I led no conclusion, no question of Jesus. I didn't want to falsely introduce and twist the narrative. Why don't we follow? Why does the fascination lead us to something different besides following him? Faithfulness to Jesus may cost us, but compromise costs us even more. John didn't compromise. It did cost him his life. But he gained so much more. When we're challenged by the king, we often live convicted, but we're unwilling to change. There's a difference between conviction alone isn't change. And to walk away from conviction means either we pick up our shame or our guilt, or we walk with something different. We walk with emptiness. It's the rich young ruler who pursued Jesus and walked away. He was sad in his heart because he couldn't follow him. Herod shows us this kind of example. Jesus tells his disciples to give them something to eat. This crowd that follows when we reintroduce the scene as they come back around Jesus and to report all that they had done. Can you imagine the scene? Like today, you're going to see some very happy people when they score touchdowns. And they're going to come to the sideline and they're going to high five everybody. They're going to be so excited. And then they're going to sit around, and what they're going to do before they even get to a point of looking at what's next, they're going to talk about what they just did to make that play happen. And they're like, yeah, it's exciting. And they're going to smash helmets and probably burp on each other and different things and just do like football guy stuff. And then we'll go back and cut to the rest of the game. That's these guys right now. Jesus says, you go into the villages. I'm going to give you authority and power. Take nothing with you. And you're going to go cast out demons, heal the sick, and preach the good news. And people will respond to you, or they'll reject you, but here's the plan. And so they do. They go out and they do all of that stuff. They cast out demons. They heal the sick. They preach the good news. People respond. Some don't. They follow Jesus' plan. Everything worked just like he said. And they come back and they said, Jesus, would you believe it? Everything worked exactly like you said it would. I don't know what Jesus' reaction was, but I don't think it would be sarcasm. I think Jesus was so excited for them, even though he knew his authority has power over all the earth. He's already showed us that. And I think Jesus was so excited for them. So many of us believe that God has this cosmic grading slip and is just waiting to give you an F. God isn't trying to give you an F. God has got the plate that already says A+, and he just wants you to grab it from him. That's it. He's not trying to fail you in life. Here's the A+, just take it. I want to give it to you. And I know that you can do it because I'm going to give you all the power to do it. Like, this is the plan, and just go do it. And then we go do it, and then we're surprised when God's way actually lives out in our lives. God, would you believe I did what you said to do, and look how life worked? That was awesome. And God's like, he doesn't, duh. Like, that's how we are. Someone come, you tell your kid, hey, here's what you should go do. Here's how it's going to work. And they come back, Dad, it worked. Duh. I told you it would. This is exactly my plan. It's always good. No. God's different than dads. He's better. He's the model that all dads should follow. He sets his kids up to succeed, gives them everything they need to succeed. And then when they do succeed, he celebrates it. He doesn't take the credit. I can see Jesus in that huddle of guys listening to their stories just smiling. If they high-fived in the ancient world, they're high-fiving. If they dapped they bro-hugged, I don't know what they did. But they're doing that. They did it. But then they get this different problem. There's a whole bunch of people here now, and they want to eat. And Jesus says, you feed them. They can't calculate that. Let me think about this for just a moment. Jesus just said, I'm going to give you power to go cast out demons and heal the sick and preach good news. They go, they come back, everything worked out just the way Jesus said. And he wasn't with them at that time. They went into all kinds of villages. Jesus didn't split himself into some kind of supernatural whatever and show up and he wasn't there. He stayed where he was. And now Jesus is with them. Don't miss that note, right? He's there. He hasn't taken his authority back away from them. He didn't say, now that you're back, all the power comes back to me. It's all mine. No. He's not there. He's physically with them. And he says, you feed them. No, Jesus, you don't understand. There's something like, 5,000 dudes here. We got nothing. Send them away. You catch it? We've got nothing. They had Jesus. You ever feel like you look at life and you feel like you got nothing? You don't know which way to go, left, right, center? You just don't know. Do you have Jesus? You're okay. You're okay. Where we see a problem, Jesus sees an opportunity. And he takes them, right? And he blows their minds with it. Scarcity in human hands becomes abundance in Jesus' hands. Think about that. There are 5,000 people. When they came back and said, seriously, we have 5 loaves and 2 fish. They were expecting Jesus to say, guys, you're right. Let's send them away. We can't take care of this problem. That was their expectation, right? You ever read the story of the little train that could, the little engine that could? I think I can, 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 I think I can. I know I can, I know I can, I know I can, I know I can, I know I can. That's different with Jesus. If we really take Jesus at his terms, it begins with, I know he can, I know he can, I know he can, I know he can, I know he can. He did, he did, he did, he did, he did, he did. And we continue to look at the scarcity and don't know what to do. Like scarcity, especially in the modern world, challenges our fundamental trust in who God is. I don't have enough. You see this in churches. Our church isn't big enough to do that. Why not? Jamarcus, when he prays, I love how he prays sometimes. He makes this statement, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but he says, like, we're praying, and he says, and God, if we have asked too little of you, would you do more anyway? You ever think you ask too little of God? Scarcity causes us to miss the bigness of who Jesus is in our lives. And these guys were no different than we are. They asked too little. And then you see the little leftover baskets. How in the world did they get leftovers? Notice that the leftovers weren't for the crowd to see. All they knew is baskets were being passed and everybody was taking food. The leftovers were for the disciples to see. And as readers of Mark's gospel, they're for us to see. Jesus is sufficient for all. Dare him, because he dares us. He dares us to trust, dares us to believe, dares us to pursue. Where we see a problem, Jesus sees an opportunity. And after that miracle, he sends his disciples away in a boat. I think it's wild to watch. Like there's 3 unique sendings in this dynamic, right? Jesus sends them out into the villages. He sends them into the crowd. He sends them into the storm. Growing up in Texas, you could see it on the horizon. You knew the storm was coming. I'm starting to learn cold fronts in Minnesota. You can see them coming in, right? You'll have a clear sky, and then the weather guy goes, it's going to be -5 tomorrow. It's like 48 the day before. It's not going to be -5. Then you look at the clouds, and they're on the horizon coming out of the western sky. Cold. Thunderstorms were the same way. You could see those clouds stack thousands of feet into the sky. Cumulonimbus clouds, for those of you who need a science lesson today. Stacking. Blackness on the bottom of the clouds, just dark. And you could hear the rumbles in the distance. Jesus sends these guys out on their boat into a storm without him. They go to the village. He's not with them. Authority, it goes. They go into the crowds. He's with them. He sends them into the storm. He stays behind. Catch the whole scene, right? Mark connects the disciples' fear in the scene when Jesus shows up to their failure to understand the loaves. That tension of, I can be dependent on Jesus. He is who he says, and there's no one like him. Our English translations, they really kind of fail when we see this. It says that he says to them, take courage, it is I. Who says that? If you could see it in the language that Jesus would speak. Now, remember, Mark wrote in Greek. Jesus doesn't speak Greek. Jesus speaks Aramaic, which is a lot like Hebrew. Jesus is going to say, don't be afraid. I am. Don't miss that. When God revealed himself to Moses, and Moses says, tell me your name, God says, I am. Jesus made a profound statement. Wanting to pass them by, Moses, who begged to see God's glory, God goes, you can't handle it. I'm just going to pass you by. You can see it on the way through. There's a direct connection here to Moses' interaction with God. And Jesus is saying something to them. And instead of going, oh, this is it. He's God. He's God. He's God. We're good. It says their hearts became hard. Just like the village before them and the Pharisees before them. They couldn't grasp that Jesus is God. Seeing miracles doesn't guarantee faith. I have watched people experience the goodness of God and still walk away from him. It's heartbreaking. At this moment, the disciples are still being tossed, just like that boat in the storm. Everything they see doesn't guarantee faith. Jesus sends them into the storm to teach them to trust his presence, not the circumstance. And even when he shows up, they're afraid. And again, once again, more afraid of him, not the storm. Rather than being comforted, they were afraid. The invitation was for them to find peace. Jesus breaks our boxes. When he says, I am, there's a couple of times this happens in different gospels. Once to the Pharisees, and they just want to rip him to shreds at that point. The disciples just turn to fear. To recognize that right in front of your face, the living God has called you to life in him. Isn't it interesting that the first things that we want to do with God is to put him into our little boxes about how God can and should move? We think that God can only move in one kind of worship. We think that God can move in only one kind of baptism. We think that God can only move in one kind of confession. We think that God can move in only one kind of tradition. And we start to box God up in these little packages because we can't handle it. And the beautiful thing about it is, in spite of all of our boxes, Jesus continues to break them all. And when we really approach him, not in light of our tradition or our presuppositions, but on his terms, he will shatter more. He will blow our minds with how awesome and how good he is. The scene closes with Jesus returning to the Gennesaret, where he had healed a man, and that man begged to go with him. And Jesus says, no, go back to your village. Tell the good I've done for you. We see a conclusion. The disciples were sent. They obeyed. They went. They accomplished. Herod refuses to follow Jesus. The disciples don't understand what they're doing now when they see Jesus break their boxes. And then this man who Jesus had made clean restores back to his family. It seems like he goes and tells the story of what God had done, because he shows back up, Jesus does, in that same town. And as soon, this very people who were afraid of him the first time now welcome him and run to him. The Gennesarets before said, Jesus, go away. They were scared. And this man continues to tell the good news of Jesus in his community. The whispers run, and Jesus returns to that village. And now it says, when they heard where he was, they ran to him. They carried every sick person they could to him. Everywhere on that side of the country, they laid their sick in the marketplaces and begged Jesus to just let them touch his clothes. And they were healed. These are people who didn't have Jewish tradition. They simply had the story of a man who encountered Jesus and his life was changed. And now they're all coming to Jesus. And Jesus comes to us in similar fashion. We have heard the story for 2,000 years. It hasn't changed. And the question gets down to, just like it did then, to the disciples, to Herod, to the people in the Gennesaret, am I willing to follow Jesus beyond my expectations? Because when I do, I find life, both now and forevermore. And that's the beauty of the King and the cross.